everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation 4 to take a look at a premium ship in World Warships Legends. Today we're going to look at the Tier 7 German premium ship, Siegfried. As usual, we'll start with history, then analysis, commanders, stats, and finish off with some gameplay. If you do want to skip around at all, you should see some time codes down in the description to help you out. In the non-history of the Kriegsmarine, the Siegfried represents Wargaming's interpretation of a Type O battlecruiser. The Type O was a follow-on to some designs for a Type P cruiser. These were cruisers that were originally dreamed up in hopes of creating a ship that could clearly dispatch with the typical light or heavy cruisers of the day and be able to flee from anything larger. It's no surprise that the combination of speed, protection, and firepower eventually gave birth to the realization that this would need to be, effectively, a battlecruiser design, since relatively well-armored, fast ships designed to kill cruisers is one of the long-standing and generally more agreed-upon uses for battlecruisers. That said, contemporary German sources would still have labeled this a battleship, but essentially being a similar design as the Type H battleship, just with armor designed for engagements versus cruisers rather than battleships, the battlecruiser label is pretty much universally applied to them now. On the shifting laundry list of Wunderwaffen being dreamed up by Germany, the Plan P cruisers would function as a screening force for different battle groups Germany also largely didn't build. These battle groups would have consisted of multiple battleships and an aircraft carrier each, along with cruisers and the appropriate destroyers for escort. When not supporting these fleet operation, it was imagined that they would engage in commerce raiding, hunting down convoys that would likely be escorted by only destroyers, light cruisers, and heavy cruisers, with enough armor to effectively protect themselves against 6 and 8-inch guns, but not enough to directly challenge ships of the battle line. And that was where the speed of the Plan P cruisers and Plan O battlecruisers were intended to kick in, because you would simply refuse to take those sorts of engagements. The in-game information about the Siegfried states the year of its design was 1940, which I believe is trying to tell you that this is an attempt to replicate the final design, as the original work for the O-class battlecruisers began in 1937, but it didn't receive a place in prominence until April 1938, when Hitler expressed discontent with the 1935 Anglo-German Naval Agreement, which was the agreement that had allowed Germany to start building battleships again in earnest. The design we see in-game, therefore, is built on an approximately 26,000-ton standard displacement, nearly identical to the French Dunkirk battleships. They would have featured a combination of oil-fueled boiler and diesel-fueled engines, giving them an impressive 14,000 nautical mile range, meaning the ships could steam from Germany to Florida and back and still have about a third a tank of gas, mostly at a design 19-knot speed, though under combat situations the diesel engines would allow the ships to attain between 33.5 and 35 knots, at least theoretically. The design of these battlecruisers was completed, and 3 were ordered, but construction did not commence on any of them in spite of their relatively short, estimated 3.5-year construction time. The battlecruisers' names are retained in history simply as O, P, and Q, so the term Siegfried here is simply what someone wanted to call this particular design. Probably the easiest way to describe the Siegfried is that it is the German Azuma, with a strong Gneisenau inspiration. Like Azuma, players who do well in this ship will generally be those who are careful with their HP because there are some key vulnerabilities. Working in its favor is that this ship is very fast, particularly for a ship that sports 15-inch guns. Being very fast means that you do get the opportunity to shoot these extra large guns a little more often from a little bit more unexpected locations. And you actually manage to do it with relatively decent accuracy. You almost can't ignore the fact that this is essentially shooting German battleship guns, and German battleship guns have a certain reputation, so being able to actually hit with them is actually quite a fun experience. And that makes this ship particularly dangerous in the appropriate cruiser-on-cruiser engagement for which the O-class battlecruiser was designed. She also sports well-protected vitals, or at least armor that has a good chance of protecting its vitals, because like the Scharnhorst and Bismarck class of ships, you do tend to take a lot of damage from penetrations, but almost never take citadel damage if you appropriately angle this ship. Unfortunately, there are some things that you can't do about the Siegfried when it comes to its overall armor, and that is essentially located in the bow of the ship, and the fact that this has a German superstructure, which is to say, entirely too much superstructure, even if it is attractive. And while you are a cruiser, it's important to note that while you're running around with 15-inch guns, and you have a decent secondary for a cruiser, you are really going to struggle against destroyers. That does kind of play at odds with the fact that you have a really good hydroacoustic search, so you'll have to find ways to play around this by using your teammates to help you out, even if you're leading the charge. And in terms of leading the charge, you do need to be very selective about what battles you actually take up. Though by no means would I say that the Siegfried is not maneuverable, the ships that it can tend to bully at close range tend to be cruisers that are a little bit more maneuverable and often come with torpedoes themselves. This puts you at a little bit of a disadvantage because these are the ships that you're supposed to be really good at fighting. So when choosing when you want to go bow in and just punch everyone in the face, you do need to be a little bit more careful with Siegfried than you do with something like Odin, Tirpitz, Bismarck, Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, etc. That makes the Siegfried kind of an interesting ship to play because usually German ships aren't exactly subtle. Also, in saying that this is a lot like a German Azuma, that doesn't sound all that great. Where the Azuma is kind of an interesting ship is that it basically can't angle against anything that has 16-inch guns, and it has no real good reason to try to angle against anything that doesn't. Where the Siegfried is quite a bit different is that she does have actually quite a bit of armor, and you can use that to your advantage. But she's also more vulnerable, not even being able to take 15-inch shells reliably while bow tanking. Actually, bow tanking isn't really even a thing at that point. So these are all things that are interesting to think about. It's a ship that's going to reward very thoughtful, very strategic, and very careful play like the Azuma, but you can do a little bit more to affect your fate. And if you don't do a little bit more to affect your fate, you may be a little bit more likely to die a lot. When we come to commanders, the Siegfried offers a lot of options that are workable, though probably one that stands out in terms of which is the most workable, unfortunately. But before I jump straight into that, I will note that though the Siegfried already has pretty good speed, you're almost certainly going to want to, and have little choice but to even increase that speed more than is listed in the stats because of just how your choices are going to work out with the German commanders here. And the most viable award goes to Karl von Müller. The chief advantage he brings here is, of course, increased accuracy. Due to the rather low damage per minute, in order to really play the Siegfried effectively, I'm afraid you're going to have to find ways to land as many shots as you possibly can. Hanging in there and playing the war of attrition is going to be tough with any battleships on the field. Von Müller also offers you the advantage of improved penetration with your AP shells, and he also has access to refill station, which isn't a personal favorite of mine, but a little extra DPM never hurt anybody except your enemy. For better or worse, this may actually help your range situationally. While extra range may sound like a pro, you do need to keep in mind that this is a German ship with the turtleback armor scheme. So the further away you want to do combat, the less your turtleback armor is really going to help you, and just keep that in mind. Though ordinarily my favorite, Gunther Lütjens lags behind a little here just because with anyone other than von Müller, your accuracy does start a bit more like the Gneisenau. So maybe I'll just leave it at that. In any case, you'll get extra damage for free because of Lütjens' hatred for everything, or Gimlet, I think it's called in the game. The faster turret traverse and rudder shift you can get with Lütjens is going to help lucky and good commanders invite extra shells into the extremely good belt armor of this ship, and maybe swing the bow around faster to make up for your vulnerabilities there. As the meta changes, maybe this will become a little bit more useful, but right now I think he takes the silver medal to von Müller. Our third option is Reinhard Scheer. There's nothing really wrong with him, though I would say that base commanders, who tend to be more useful in destroyers, a little less useful in cruisers and not all that useful in battleships, probably tends towards the battleship side of this, unless you specifically want to go all out on concealment and try to smuggle your 15-inch battleship effectively around the map with a concealment under 11 kilometers. It's a neat trick. And not that he's a really unpredictable wildcard, but you may consider using Ciliax. And the only reason that you're going to want to do this is to augment your survivability. It's not a totally terrible idea. You're still going to be thinking about the Gneisenau a lot, but you can get a 4th heal and less reason to need it along the way through the reduction in the number of fires you'll take. Unfortunately, slot 1 isn't very good, and building for secondaries on this ship isn't the best use of the Siegfried. In fact, in order to make this work, you'll probably have to screw up Ciliax for all of your legitimate battleship commanders, so I can't say that I would recommend it. As we run into stats, we're going to talk about where the Siegfried is overall, because comparing this to cruisers is a mostly pointless endeavor, as is really comparing it to battleships. For survivability, you have 55,000 hit points, which is unsurprisingly massive for a cruiser. In fact, it's 2,500 more than Azuma, which was formerly the HP king at this tier among cruisers, and 1,100 more actually than the Monarch, the lowest hit point battleship at tier 7. Your 22% damage reduction for torpedoes is pretty similar to German battleships, and is also best in class, tied with the Azuma. As far as protection goes, the Siegfried is an interesting ship in terms of armor, and it really is a tale of two armor profiles. First, you have a very squishy bow, which is why this is bright green rather than the normal olive green that you'll find on cruisers like Hipper. Though it's only 1mm difference, it's going to make a big difference in your overall life. Since your bow is not 27mm, you can't even bounce 15-inch shells. You also have a fairly large citadel that sits slightly above the waterline. This presents something of a problem if you like to nose in towards everything, because that's actually just about the worst way to protect your vitals in this ship. As a result, you're going to want to present your angled side to invite people to mistakenly shoot your belt. And if you are one of those people, don't shoot this in the belt. Shoot it below the forward turrets, in the bow. Though it's not obvious just looking at the citadel in the armor viewer, there is a very thick turtleback that you can just barely see in the casemate layer. I believe it's 80mm, so the way that you'll probably want to play this in order to preserve your hit points is like the Scharnhorst or Gneisenau, just knowing that you don't have the benefit of an icebreaker bow. And those 15-inch battleship shells, and anything above, ignore your bow and will only try to defeat this 100mm forward section of your citadel. The only other thing that you'll note about this armor scheme is that it is a typical huge amount of superstructure, which is going to take a lot of damage, even on the best of days. The Siegfried has 3 turrets that mount 2 380mm guns each, functionally 15 inches. Essentially, she has the same armament as the Gneisenau. These range out to 16.2 kilometers, they reload every 26 seconds, and have a 36-second turret traverse. There's really not a lot of reason to talk about this as cruiser armament other than to say that it easily has the largest guns of any cruiser in the game right now. If you were to compare this to the Gneisenau, the only way these really differ is that the Siegfried actually has an extra 100 meters range, and is arguably a little bit more accurate than the Tier 6 German battleship. Damage, fire chance, and all that, it's all the same. By way of comparison versus Azuma, the other ship that doesn't really fit within the Tier 7 cruiser space, though she is also a cruiser, she has the same reload, 4 seconds better turret traverse, and 400 extra meters on her range. But because the Azuma has 3 extra guns, even though the Azuma has less damage per shell, she does inch out the Siegfried in terms of its overall damage potential, making the Siegfried the ship that right now has the lowest DPM of any cruiser at Tier 7. This isn't all that surprising though, really, since the ship with the largest guns tends to be the ship at the bottom of any DPM calculation, because every shot they hit with is more likely to do damage, both with HE and with AP, just because of how penetration is calculated. since the Siegfried does live up to some of the marketing as having more cruiser-like accuracy, this does mean in terms of actual hits, she may be similar to what you would expect from any other German battleship, once you figure missing with at least 2 shells in the Tirpitz or the Bismarck is a near mathematical certainty. And for what it's worth, as you might expect, this German battlecruiser has a pretty impressive secondary array for a cruiser. That said, she'd be significantly below average as a battleship, and as a consequence, I probably wouldn't build into secondaries, in addition to the fact that you'd probably have to use a cross-class commander, and unless or until this is given a secondary accuracy boost consumable, they're really more of a fireworks show that make your ship look really cool, but don't do a lot. Next we move on to torpedoes. Anyone who's ever played a high-level German ship is not going to be all that surprised by the torpedo selection here. You have a quadruple launcher on each side. They have 6-kilometer range and do the standard German 13,700 damage. These torpedoes have good angles both forward and back, as you might expect, and though they seem to be tucked away and you'd think they'd be a little bit more well protected, they get knocked out plenty of the time still. So basically they're just like the torpedoes on any other German Tier 7 ship, except that they're 1 knot faster, which I can't say is life-changing. As we come to maneuverability, Siegfried has a base speed of 33.5 knots, which would pretty much be the exact average for a Tier 7 cruiser, but that makes this always a good time to point out that this is a cruiser in name only. The 880-meter turning circle kind of points this out, and while that is really wide, it is 40 meters less than the Azuma, still slightly better than the Chapayev, and kind of in the middle of the pack if it happened to be classed as a battleship. Your 14-second rudder shift is definitely worst in class, though it would be 3rd best if she was a battleship. And it's also worth mentioning that she has access to a 3rd slot rudder modification, which can actually get this rudder down to the 7-second range, maybe even faster. But in any case, if these were designed to be able to outrun battleships, they have a speed that exceeds every battleship that it can face, though not French battleships captained by JC or any other player if they're using the speed boost. For concealment, the Siegfried is surprisingly not the most visible cruiser at Tier 7. In fact, both the Russian cruisers are more visible, and this is actually only 100 meters worse than Prince Eugen. So she's pretty noticeable, but this is actually very good for what is effectively a battleship, and a focused effort to reduce this concealment can probably get you in the 10-point something range. I don't know if that's totally worth doing. Like I said, the full concealment build was sheer, but throwing a bunch of concealment onto von Mueller, along with the concealment modification, wouldn't be a completely terrible idea, since it would almost guarantee you a 3-kilometer advantage in spotting over any battleship you're likely to face, which I might have noted once or twice that you need to be somewhat careful around. In any case, the other number that you should pay attention to here is firing from smoke. At 12.5, basically this means you're not going to be firing from smoke undetected in almost any game where the enemy has even a small interest in challenging your position. And when we come to consumables, and this is the most cruiserly section of this not really cruiser review, because everything that you see here is cruiser stuff. Your damage control is a cruiser time damage control, so you will be able to use it a little bit more freely than a battleship damage control because it recharges at just 1 minute. You come with the same hydroacoustic search that you'll find on Hipper and Prince Eugen, which is to say a very good German hydro. You have a catapult fighter and no options for either a spotter plane or secondary consumable, which I think if Wargaming is really committed to this being the secondary gimmick in Legends, this ship should have access to. Then you have the standard 2 cruiser heals. The one thing that I will say about this heal though is since you do have an excessively large HP pool compared to other cruisers, the heal is actually a bit more powerful, and that's nice. But the number of them is just 2, and that isn't going to take you into battleship levels of survivability. And now we'll finally get into a little bit of gameplay. We're going to be on Crash Zone. I will go ahead and get my commander up on the screen right away. Here we are using Karl von Mueller, and also we have swapped out the rudder shift module that I originally was using for the concealment module. that does two nice things for you, one of which allows you to operate a little bit closer to enemy ships without necessarily being spotted. The other is that it takes away the effect of a fully leveled Cunningham inspiration, which you're very, very likely to see. So both of those things are good. Hopefully we get hit a little bit less often, and we take a few less shots because of it. Everything else here is pretty much as you would expect. We're going for punching power, and we're also going for a little extra damage, and certainly accuracy. So all of these things, great things to have in Siegfried. And though I start in the middle, I'm going to come over to the right side because I tend to find that not a whole lot of people want to play on the right side. As you can see, it looks like one of our boats that was over here, the cruiser, is thinking about going to the middle, so I guess it's a fair trade. In any case, it doesn't appear as though everybody's awake over here yet. That's one reason why I wouldn't want to be shooting. The other is I'm kind of a little too in the open right now, and there are a few too many ships really interested in shooting at me, potentially. So we're going to wait a little bit before we start opening up, just to get a little bit closer to this island, and to get a little bit more range and angle that I need. Here we go, starting out on New Orleans. You can judge over the course of this battle. Some of the shots that I'm going to miss are certainly my fault. Some of them you can probably, come up with other reasons for. That one looks like it didn't quite lead him like I should have. We are increasing the range here mostly because I feel like I'm still going to be able to hit this New Orleans. I don't want those battleships in the back to have easy shots on me, and the effect of the range is going to help me avoid damage. Unfortunately, it also is a little bit of a hindrance there. We had a nice grouping on that New Orleans and didn't come away with a whole lot of it. But the groupings that we're getting, I feel, particularly if you're going to use von Mueller, are pretty good. There we come away with a fat load of nothing. That might have been my fault. Hard to say. Waiting for this Lenin to turn just about as broadside as it can to me, because though a lot of cruisers, particularly at this range, probably couldn't do too much to the Lenin, obviously in Siegfried we're able to punch him pretty hard. We do land one Citadel, 13,000 damage. Pretty nice. Obviously, if we were in a ship that had 12 guns, maybe we would have done a decent chunk of damage just from penetrations, but probably not the unrepairable Citadel damage we're doing there. We probably also would have been able to that New Orleans, but at the same time you can't ignore that these guns have a lot of punch for a cruiser. Now there's a strange ringing in my ear. I think that's trying to tell me that I have hit the Jean Barrier. I have hit the Jean Barrier in this ship more often than with any other ship in the game, particularly when you consider I've only owned it for a week, and right now it's really just on loan anyway. But the thing is fast enough. You can very casually get up to 36 knots that, you find yourself on the edge of the map pretty quick, particularly if you're trying to really flank. And that's probably one of the strengths of the Siegfried, being something of a flanking, stealthy battleship. But always a little bit cumbersome to hit the edge of the map. Doesn't make you feel real good as a player. So now we have a brilliant idea. As you can see, we caught wind of that Lenin, and we're thinking if he continues straight, he's going to pop out on this island pretty close. And I have torpedoes. So this is definitely a time where I'm thinking I can probably sneak up and try to ambush him. That is one of the situations where I would actually take on a battleship, particularly at close range. And now as we're approaching the island, we're going to get all of our guns situated on that side of the ship. Slowing down just a little bit here because we don't want to overshoot our mark, and oh no. And it's just a miracle that wasn't worse than it was. I think his aim was probably a little high because he hits us right in the bow, and obviously each one of those shells is going to go through. Thankfully, we have managed to preserve all of our turrets. But now we're in trouble because the Lenin is actually more maneuverable than I am. We don't want him to ram us, but at the same time, he's giving us all bow. He does a good job making sure he doesn't actually run into me because he has that excellent maneuverability. Ah, man. And anyway, he does just a ton of damage. None of that was probably Citadel, actually. We very casually pressed the trigger button probably only exactly once, not frantically trying to put any sort of damage into the side of his ship. I managed to Citadel him a couple of extra times, and we have sent him back to port. A really, really excellent play by the Lenin, honestly. It's only in retrospect that he probably should have rammed me, but I'm not complaining about people not ramming me, for the record. But the thing is, that's a good show of just how well armored the middle section of this ship is, because those are 16-inch guns. They're shooting at me, I would say, pretty near point-blank range, and that extra thick belt armor and the 80mm turtleback behind it probably ended up with 8 or 9 penetrations and over penetrations. But that didn't result in enough damage to kill me. Putting some more shells out on the Massachusetts. What I was doing there, just hugging the island for a good period of time, was just not popping out in front of this ship without first having turned my guns to the correct direction. We're presenting a pretty good angle. If I was to get hit at this angle, there is at least a chance that I would bounce some of those shells. Right now, playing the Siegfried is complicated by just the number of American battleships out there, particularly the Massachusetts. That kind of ship makes playing this kind of ship a little bit more tricky because, I mean, ideally you can show a 45-degree angle somewhere in that area. You can get pretty much all of your guns into play, and you can bounce stuff, but with super heavy AP, if you're at a 45-degree angle, you're not going to bounce an American. So you have to be a little bit more careful. It's hard to do when literally there's 2 Massachusetts on every team, and probably will be for some time because it's a good ship. And now I'm moving up towards the north. There are 2 things I'm hoping to accomplish here. One is not to die, but I need to get over to A because we are looking pretty not great on points. If we can hold on to this, we can do okay and win as long as we take out one ship and get into that cap pretty quickly. Now, unfortunately, you can see we're having some problems even keeping the one cap that we have, and that's just making things worse. These islands do also provide me a little bit of cover, and obviously several needed seconds to actually recuperate some HP. I'm judging my distance from obviously the next island, and then also like what shot should I be taking. This is a little bit tricky because the Odin presents a better target. So I'm going to pick the Odin. I don't want to get too much attention though, because if I get a lot of attention, I don't have a lot of hit points. And at the same time, I can't just sit here and not help because the team really does need a kill or two here. The Massachusetts is heading back north, it looks like. We put a nice salvo out there. We got some pretty good dispersion. Nice chunky shot there into the middle of his ship. As tough as the Massachusetts is, I find that the Siegfried does citadel it pretty often. Now we're aiming high because all we really need to do is hit, and superstructure will be just fine. So as dangerous as other battleships are to you, the Siegfried does have the capacity to be almost as dangerous to enemy battleships, because you do have really punchy battleship guns. Now we've completely lost B, so this is really bad. The only way for our team to win at this point is to finish everybody off by the end. That's not looking real good because we've lost sight of a cruiser, and we need to capture all 3 bases, just not to get pointed. We managed to sneak some shells over this island. Those are the more Gneisenauian of shells that I've seen out of this, and that will occasionally happen. A little unfortunate when you only have 6 guns if you do get trolled by shots like that. Unfortunately, that island is now fully in the way. I don't shoot the island, even though it is in my nature. And we continue to put shells way out there on that Odin. That doesn't look real good, but it looks like our Jean Bart did manage to weather the storm. He's still alive, which means he's in the base, and now I just need to get in this base. And we just need to hope that the last enemy ship pops up. Okay. We have been spotted, and we spot the Azuma at just about exactly the same time. This is not real great because, as you can see, he's got a lot of hit points, or at least a lot more than I do. And I'm not sure how many of the battleships are in range or have eyes on him. We are going to get our fighter up in the air because we need to make sure he stays spotted. He is most likely going to finish us off. Unfortunately, the Azuma is actually one of the ships that you can do relatively well against, both because it takes a really tragic amount of HE damage, but also if you do get it broadside, you have exactly the right type of guns to just do terrible things to it. And the Azuma actually can't return the favor. That said, I'd be a lot better off facing another Siegfried right now because I could punch straight through its bow. And if he's angled like this, I pretty much have to resort to HE. We go ahead and put some torpedoes out there. They're probably not going to get there, but, you know, he's driving towards it, so maybe. No. Unfortunately, can't really pull that one out, but I think that it was a good example of what this particular ship is good at, what it sometimes isn't good at. I think you can probably imagine what this ship might be like without a high accuracy commander. It might be a little frustrating, and I would say that that is generally my understanding of it. That said, the more I've played this ship, the more I like it. The ability to have a relatively stealthy battleship is really, really nice. When people start shooting all over the place and they don't know that you're 12 kilometers away from them, and then you open up with a broadside, it's really just lovely. Hopefully they would be shooting at a healthier and more armored target, but in a pinch, you can tank against a battleship. You usually have to do it from medium range, just to kind of get a little bit of the penetration fall off, and also so you can make the most out of your belt armor. But do pick your engagements, because in a situation where you have a choice between an enemy battleship shooting you or another battleship, it's almost always going to be better for them to be shooting the other battleship, just because of your armor situation. So you can take some hits. Just don't bow into everything, because that can end a lot worse than it did for me in this particular game. In any case, those are my thoughts on the Siegfried. I do look forward to earning this ship. I hope you've enjoyed my take on it, and I do hope to see you guys on the next one.